Hello, my name is Bucki indeed, but I'm not going to share much more about myself. After all, this is TED, Ideas Worth Spreading, not TED, CVs and resumes worth spreading. So instead of using this 18 minutes to brag about myself, I'm going to teach you something about tiny tales and how those can become toxic tiny tales. I will teach you how to detect those poisonous narratives and how to craft and design nutritious ones. I want to convince you that words can change words, so you have to build them carefully. I want to teach you how to become a conscious sentence designer and use those words ethically. I have to admit that I have been obsessed with words for more than 20 years. And even though obsessed seems such a strong word, I've decided to put it in a sentence. It's a conscious choice of mine. I like to design sentences. I think of words as tiny blocks that you put together in a perfect structure so that they can serve the purpose perfectly. After all, I graduated from architecture, and despite no spectacular success in this field, I still use architecture as a reference. I say that if you want to design a good building, you need to learn about the mechanics, the construction materials, but also to have a sense of aesthetics so that you don't profane the face of the earth with this or this. And when you want to design a perfect sentence, you better learn how the brain works so that you create something elegant, digestible, and nutritious, so that you don't pollute the universe with hollow, redundant, generic language. In short, I want you to know that you can create something that is trustworthy tiny tales and not tiny toxic tales. After all, you don't want to intoxicate somebody with your tiny tales, and probably you shouldn't live by the tiny toxic tales itself. So, what are tiny tales? They are sometimes referred to as a micro-narrative. They can take a form of a sentence, a meme, a statement, or a quote, or aphorism, or even a visual. And even though they are tiny, they can be like most tiny things, sometimes cute, sometimes deadly, sometimes both. Tiny tales, toxic or not, prey on one human flaw, and that is that the micro-narratives prey on our narrative fallacy. What is a narrative fallacy? Well, what better way to use than to quote Malcolm Gladwell with a micro-narrative itself. So Gladwell says like this: we as humans have a bit of a storytelling problem. We are quick to assume and come up with explanation for things that don't really need an explanation for. So in short, we are very hungry for elegant, digestible truth in the form of an easy to understand, beautiful sentence. To our demise, however, those statements sometimes are not so true as we think. And that's where toxicity begins. Sometimes we don't even need much to craft a story in our head. Take this example. In 1940, two psychologists, Heider and Simmel, showed people a sequence of events in the form of simple visuals. Triangles, lines, basically. I've decided to replicate this experiment and ask people what do they see in those shapes as seen from above. So here's my sequence, not the original one. So here's picture number 1, picture number 2, what happened here, and then picture number 3. Objectively, it is just a bunch of shapes, right? But to my surprise, and to the surprise of Heider and Simmel probably, people came up with storylines about the facts of the events. So they saw the stories of betrayal, arguments, or sometimes mother picking up a child from school. That's cool. But not only did they see the story there, but they also decided to judge the characters, the protagonists. So sometimes the bigger triangle became like a bully, a very offensive macho man, and the little triangle was like a fake friend, and the circle was a gullible victim of bullies who trusted the wrong people. Well, wrong triangles probably. So what this experiment shows and what my replication shows is that sometimes you give human shapes and they form a story and judge the characters. Okay, so that was a tiny tale of triangles and one circle. Was it really toxic? Well, that's debatable. The experiment only shows that we organize everything using this storytelling mode. And then we conclude very fast. Sometimes the conclusions can be right, but sometimes they can be catastrophically wrong. But the real problem is not that it's not that we conclude fast. The real problem is that sometimes we don't verify the facts and the truths with the tiny tales that we live by. Let's examine another example. There is a Polish statement, a Polish proverb actually, that clearly states that if you supervise everyone and if you micromanage, then your team is going to be better. It is in Polish, pańskie oko konia tuczy. But there is no direct English translation, but I found this one by Benjamin Franklin that it's really a similar one. You know, it clearly states that if you supervise somebody, if you really look from behind the shoulder of how the person is operating on the computer, they are going to get better. They're going to excel. So that reminds me of one story. Some time ago, I was working with a group of managers during an online meeting. They were in the home office and I was doing the workshop from my home. And during the break, one of the managers decided to move from his home office to an office. So I asked him, why? And he said, well, to supervise my team. And I said again, but why? And he said, Piotr, obviously, pańskie oko konia tuczy. So I guess he believed that without his supervision, his team would become like this anarchistic, unmotivated blob that would not do anything. He believed that statement, and that belief shaped his behavior. So in short, this tiny tale shaped how he operated. But if you care to really look into the research, you will see that if you don't give people autonomy, if you supervise them too much, actually they will not perform better. So you should probably shape the statement differently. Keep on staring and the horse will die. But the funny thing is that I told him that, and he did not want to change his belief. You know, I think it is because his identity was rooted so much in this. Okay, so now let's talk about the toxicity of the tales. I like to put them in 4 categories. The first category is, true narratives, true tiny tales that carry true message. Then you have false narratives, non-factual, fictional, that carry also a true message. Then you have true stories that carry a false message, and of course you have the end, which is the false stories that carry false message. The first category is kind of obvious one, right? Of course, some tiny tales can be generalized and used as actual truths. The second category is an interesting one. There are in fact some stories that are non-factual, that are fictional, that are made up, but carry a very true message. Take Red Riding Hood, for example. I'm not going to spoil fun for you, but this is not a factual, based on fact story. It's not a true story. You cannot be retrieved from the guts of a wolf after being eaten without no harm. But I think it carries a very relevant message. Don't share details of your destination with people you meet in the forest, right? So that is possible. And then there is, of course, this category, which is also an interesting one. These are anecdotal evidence. So it might have happened, the tiny true might be true in some instances, but if you generalize it, it can become really dangerous. And then, of course, there is the last one. I'm not going to talk much about it because these are lies, 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 and plain lies. So let's not do it. The problem is, however, that even though there is about 50% of that can be actually toxic, we still don't have a radar for the truth in it. So we don't seem to be okay with distinguishing which ones are true or not. Especially if our narratives, if the things that we listen to or state are simple, unexpected, credible, concrete, emotional, and shaped like stories. Those 6 characteristics of the narrative are the works of Chip Heath and Dan Heath. And I use them to also interpret and detect things in the tiny tales. And I use them. So whenever I come across something that is easy to pronounce and remember, something that is pleasantly surprising, something that is also perceived as credible, and something that is concrete and easy to imagine, and also emotionally charged, and also is shaped like a story, then I better take a look. And I urge you to do that too, because it might be toxic. All right? Let's take a look at this example. This is the deadliest example here. If that sentence was a serial killer, it would have been Ted Bundy. Elegant, handsome, and incredibly dangerous. This sentence comes from the O.J. Simpson trial. And in the O.J. Simpson trial, after the experiment, when the prosecutor asked O.J. Simpson, who was accused of murdering his wife and her friend, was asked to put on a glove in an experiment. And the glove, didn't fit that well. Maybe because it was put over silicone gloves for the forensic instances, and maybe because O.J. Simpson used a lot of steroids during the process. So he might have swollen. So in the concluding talk, in the final arguments, this beautiful statement, and a toxic one, was said, if it doesn't fit, you must acquit. To the jury. The funny thing is that the DNA fit, but at that time, DNA was not easy to imagine. The glove was so easy to imagine. This sentence is not only elegantly beautiful, but it also uses one cognitive flaw, which is rhyme as reason effect. If we see something that rhymes and has a nice rhythm to it, not only do we remember it better, but we also assess it as more credible and close to truth. So, this argument for more people proves to be more accurate than this one. Even though, grammatically and linguistically it's very similar, but still people assess the first one as the more credible. The second one, people tend to think more that what sobriety conceals, alcohol reveals, is more true than this fact. Actually, this is also almost the same sentence that uses the rhythm, and the upper one is using rhythm to accentuate it. All right, so what about unexpected? If it doesn't fit, you must acquit, offers kind of like a surprising explanation to the events that happened. And that is what jury also took into the consideration. And if tiny tales reveal something that is surprising, unexpected, it kind of feels pleasantly warm that, oh yeah, I have discovered the truth of the universe, you better watch out because it might not be true. Okay, now what adds more credibility to the tiny tale? Well, the credibility of the if it doesn't fit, you must acquit comes from the aesthetic of the statement. But also, the credibility comes from the messenger. So if the messenger is credible, then of course we deem the truth more credible, even if it's not very true. So, credibility is not the result of factfulness. It is assessed very often superficially and often biased. And sometimes because we want to believe something is true. Take a look at this. This is a very famous statement. And a lot of people want to think it's true. But if we take a look at the facts, it turns out that a lot of people who have experienced traumatic events call for a therapeutic intervention. They don't grow, they don't make it stronger. Yeah, 1 in 5 humans might grow stronger. They might experience something that is called post-traumatic growth. But it's not true for all. So the true statement should probably be, what does not kill you sometimes make you stronger, sometimes leaves the mark, and sometimes call for a therapeutic intervention. But that statement would be longer and not so fascinating and pleasantly true. It's so much easier to do the first one. All right, what is the next factor? Well, easy to imagine. All right, easy to imagine is when you think about the words as a code that is interpreted as by the brain as an image. So if I tell you, for example, now fruit, I'm pretty much sure that all of you have a certain fruit. Some of you oranges, apples, kiwis, bananas. But if I tell you a red shiny apple, you are all going to see red shiny apple. If it doesn't fit, you must acquit, was assessed based on the fact that they saw the glove from before, so it was easy to imagine this. DNA, I repeat, was not easy to imagine, especially in 1907. So the easier the brain translates words into the images, the more we trust tiny tale is true. Abstract language is not doing the trick. So what about the next statement? Emotionally charged. Well, what makes us feel leaves a better mark, but also makes us feel that something is more true. Also, deadly metaphors and deadly language also very often leaves the impact. You might have noticed that I use them quite a lot, also to make an impact on you. All right, there is another factor, and that is the shape of the story. The shape of the story. Sometimes we don't need much to conclude that there is a story. Take a look at this quote, allegedly by Hemingway. Actually, it's not Hemingway, but still, people read those 6 words and they see the story. They infer the story from this. And that was also true for the jury who saw this statement. This statement saved O.J. Simpson in that trial. But to my thinking, it is a toxic one. All right, but it is an example of a toxic tale. I told you that I don't want to just teach you about the toxic tales. I want to tell you about something positive. So let's examine another example. Don't mess with Texas. All right, it's a tiny tale that changed the behavior of a lot of Texans. Well, in Texas, they had a bit of a problem, and that problem was there was a lot of rubbish and littering around. So the government decided to have a kind of like a cute little campaign featuring Woody the Owl with a claim, give a hoot, don't pollute. And that actually did not work at all. Actually, the littering got worse. So fortunately for the government, they asked the academics to do some follow-up research and find out what could be done. The first thing the academics did was to discover who was doing the littering, right? Not surprising, there was a lot of males who were doing the litterings. Men, sorry for that. And very, very specific men between the ages of 18 and 35. So what they did next, they wanted to find out what is the identity of those men. And it turned out that they were very patriotic in Texas and that they were very much rooted in the identity of the true Texan. So they come up with this statement to actually, use that. And they did. So if you think about it, Don't Mess with Texas is a very positive, totally non-toxic tale. It is still very easy to pronounce. It is surprisingly and unexpected because you know what to expect if you mess indeed with Texan. It's concrete and credible because you know what it means, and it's emotionally charged, and it is definitely can be interpreted as a story. So here are the things that you need to remember and look out for. All right? So I think that now, after having told you about both toxic and non-toxic, I'm going to show you a couple of examples, and let's take a quick quiz, and you're going to see for yourself whether you would be very quick to assess if those are toxic or not. They're all based on the rules that I taught about, even the names, which might be somewhat surprised. But if you hear the name Marilyn Monroe or Brigitte Bardot, you have this beautiful alliteration, and a story comes to your mind because there is a story behind it. So, which ones are toxic, which are not? You cannot state that just looking at it. You have to actually look for the truth behind it. So this quiz would not be okay to take now. But I urge you to do that, because there is something beautiful about being a hunter and a huntress for toxic tales, because then you can prevent people from saying things that are not true. I guess some people don't want to deconstruct tiny tales. They don't want to find the truth behind the statement. And I think that is because they are the part of the identity. But I think it's okay to be prepared to lose a part of the identity that we possess. What's wrong with that? So, not to mention, sometimes those toxic tiny tales come with a messenger who intentionally or unintentionally can be toxic. So I urge you to also do that. Question those tiny tales wherever you come across them. Poke and nag the messengers, even if they are standing in front of you at a TEDxBridge event in a white shirt that signals authority. So poke them, nag them, because you have every right to do so. Become a linguistic smart skeptic. And also, remember what Socrates once said. And I like this quote very much, and I like to paraphrase it. So the guy, I don't know if I can call Socrates a guy, but the guy said, and an unexamined life is not worth living. And I like to say, an unexamined tale is not worth spreading. So please deconstruct each tiny tale, examine it carefully, break the magic spell of some, be a brave, toxic tale hunter and huntress, and most of all, be sure to poke and nag the messengers. Thank you very much.